Okay, good morning for those of you who are already online, and good afternoon. I know we've got a few people joining us from Europe as well. And hopefully, at this point, you can hear me. We will start in, oops, that's not where that should be. We will start in exactly 5 minutes. Going to just mute phones and there we go. Welcome those of you who are joining. We're just waiting a few more minutes before we begin. Seeing joining happening really rapidly. Hopefully everyone can see me. We're going into the late afternoon here in Sydney. Daylight is leaving. Let's get my lights up here. Okay. And Julian, can I just get a sound check? Okay, great. Thanks, Kai. Yes, I can see you and your screen. Thank you. Thanks, Kai. Hey, Cam. Hi, Natalie. Great, yeah. So we will be using the chat function quite a bit for those of you, you might want to locate it. Hi, Tanya, as we go through the program. There will be specific moments that I'll ask, hi, Sophie, where I'll ask for questions and answer them. It's obviously difficult to balance the time of the presentation with questions all into the time period, the 1 hour. But feel free as we go into it to pop questions into the chat function. Hey guys, hi everyone, Tonya, Stephen, Justin, Edinburgh, great. Hi Nikki, welcome. Must be pretty early in the morning now. Oh, hey Johnny, great to hear from you. And Rosemary, Steve, and Auckland, awesome. From Prague, hey Iva. 7:30 in Scotland, yeah, nice and early. But at least it's summertime, so hopefully the weather's decent. I remember when I was living when I moved to Ireland for a couple of years, when I got there in the year 2000, I think it was. The first thing I heard from people was the summer of 1987 was amazing. And I'm growing up in South Africa, I was like, we never ever thought about whether one summer was really better than another because they were all just kind of the same, but clearly not in your guys' neck of the woods. Okay. So from Switzerland. Hi, Andrea. Wichita, Kansas, 1:30 a.m. I'm impressed. Thanks for attending. Hopefully this webinar doesn't emotionally exhaust you. Wow, thanks, very committed. Yeah, thank you. Hi, Martine from Melbourne. Yes, it's not raining today. That's good. I'm assuming that's in Scotland. Hi from Sydney. Eswatini, wow. Thank you. Nice to have you here. Wow, we've got a good collection from around the world. From Bali, lucky. Adelaide, my son, my dad from down the road. Myanmar, Philippines. Wow, great, this is super. Wow, we've got a big global audience. Yeah, we try, it's always tricky with the times like this. Why this webinar was starting at 4:30, because it's usually suitable for, we either have to suit Europe or the US. For Australia, because if we try and suit Europe and the US, we end up at sort of our own 2 a.m. here in Sydney. So it's quite a tricky one. Sometimes we run these webinars early in the morning and evening as well to suit. Hi, everyone. Wow, good collection of people. So I'm hoping, as I said, as we're about to kick into the webinar, please feel free to ask questions as we go along. In the chat function is what I'll be looking at. I won't be looking at the Q&A button. Oops, sorry, I keep on trying to, there it is there. I'll be looking in the chat function, and I may miss something. I'm hoping Julian, my co-founder of Awakened Mind, Julian, if you don't mind just keeping an eye on the chat function as well, and if needs be, just Skype me. Julian might Skype me to alert me if I've missed something from Indonesia. And everyone, no doubt, is affected by this COVID world of ours. We're in for those of you not in Sydney, we're in a lockdown at the moment. We've been in a lockdown for about, I don't know, must be about 6 weeks now or something, and it doesn't look like the end is in sight for quite a while. Is it 7 weeks, is it? Okay, yeah. Team at Hilton, great. Yeah, everybody. Yes. So any of you guys think you're doing it tough in your businesses, hotel businesses, travel businesses? I have a lot of empathy for your guys' situation. It must be very tough. Okay, it's 4:30 on my watch at least, and we are going to get going. Now, this presentation could take a lot shorter than an hour. I've never had a complaint from anyone if a webinar takes shorter, but as a facilitator, we're often conscious of trying to like stretch it to the hour to add value. But in this case, if we finish early, great. We suggest you can, if you've got other plans, you can do them or rest more. So today's topic is emotional exhaustion, how to manage it within yourself and others. Very quickly on me, some of you may have not met me. I know there's several people who have met me, including my son on this webinar. I've been in this business for 20 years. I've got this dual focus of leadership and culture, as well as mindfulness, mental health, mental well-being. Hence I have business degrees, but I also have a postgrad in psychotherapy work. And lucky enough to work with large organizations around the world and trying to scale self-awareness, leadership disciplines, culture change. And today's webinar is more focused on the mindfulness, mental well-being side of it. But we know that when particularly leaders, when leaders are not mentally well, that mental illness invariably leaks onto their direct reports, and that can come out in the form of disrespect or anxiety. There's a whole range of things that lead to less than ideal behavior. So there's this ripple effect from leaders. Leaders really matter, and it's one of the reasons why so much of our focus is on leadership. So what is emotional exhaustion? Let's just start with that, right? So here's a definition from healthline.com. Emotional exhaustion is a state of feeling emotionally worn out and drained as a result of accumulated stress from your personal or your work lives, or both. I think for those of you, we did Julian ran a poll on our Awakened Mind page on LinkedIn around how are people doing, and there was various choices, but basically 33%, somewhere around 33% of people are feeling okay, and everyone else, that's the 67% of everyone else, is in a state of mild to extreme exhaustion. And it's really emotional exhaustion for most, because getting a good night's sleep doesn't seem to fix it. That's a sign of emotional exhaustion. It's my personal view, and I'll cover this a bit later. I don't think, I would be shocked if there's anyone on this call or on this webinar or anyone actually around the world who's not a little bit more emotionally exhausted than normal. I think the state of the world has all pushed us, even those of us who have really good resources and training, that it's pushed us a little bit into a bit of exhaustion. It's just how the process is at the moment. What are the classic treatments? So in this webinar, we're not going to cover all the classic treatments, but I thought I would just benchmark them there, just so we know what's available. And we're going to really deep dive and focus on the mental well-being side of it and what you can do with your mind. So the classics, if you go into, if you go onto Google, and you wouldn't have to do this webinar, you could just go onto Google and say, what do you do for emotional exhaustion? Number one, eliminate the stressor. That's not so easy. I mean, it would be lovely if you could just do that. Second one is change your habits. And we know, for example, our Novartis client, one of our biggest clients, and many of you on the call from Novartis, like that's your part of the Energize for Life, is this nutrition, rest, good habits, right? Getting enough sleep, limiting alcohol, exercise, eating healthy. And then the third option, obviously, is to talk to someone to get help, whether that's a trusted friend, a family member, a professional, or the family doctor. But in our case, we're going to mainly focus on, actually not focus on any of these. We're focused on developing the mental capability to handle emotional exhaustion more intelligently. The current reality is pretty sobering. So if you look at this Gallup 2021 state of the global workplace, 43% of employees experienced stress a lot of the previous day. 25% of employees experienced sadness during a lot of the previous day, and only 20% of employees are engaged at work. Now, our research would indicate it's pretty much impossible to be truly mentally well if you're not engaged at work, because then some part of you, and we'll cover this a bit later, some part of you is in shutdown around your workplace is a source of pain and shutdown if you're not engaged. And if you're spending that much hours there, you're not going to be that well. So that's a really important point. Amanda, lovely to see, to have you here. Was in tears because of both emotional and physical exhaustion. Yeah. Amanda, thanks for sharing. It's wonderful when we have participants sharing this, because we're going to cover it in a moment. There's so much image management around this as well. So a lot of us pretend, and we've various of clients we've worked with tend to pretend that we're okay, or we speak in very general terms around not being okay, but we don't share, like you've just shared, Amanda, like the actual reality of what we're going through. So appreciate that sharing. Please keep that coming, because at least now we're getting to a point where we're all admitting that we're going through this. Okay, let me get to the next question. So we've got this situation where we've got emotional exhaustion. The workplace generally is not that supportive and of people's well-being, because let's face it, workplaces are primarily oriented towards productivity and getting things done, deadlines, etc., customer service. And it's quite some balance to get this right between looking after your people and having an emotionally healthy workplace, but also getting things done. And this is an interesting dichotomy. Long-term, yeah, grief of losing my husband. Thank you, Carol, for sharing. That's tough. Wow, really, really hard. Yeah. And I think to your sharing, Carol, is I mean, I can't, yeah, I'm just sorry, I'm just taking a breath reading what you've just written. And I think part of the us so isolated, right? There's such isolation in this experience for so many people. Not happy and supportive messages. Thanks, Rosemary. Yeah, I can't keep reading, I'm gonna keep going. Thanks, everyone. So we are in a position where things are not great. Now, our work at Awaken Mind, which is our app business, and that's what this presentation's under. We've got Mindful Eater and Awaken Mind. Our work is focused on the mind. It's not so focused on nutrition or rest. We do have a whole sleep program as well, but or giving people EAP support. It's more around helping the workplace itself become a source of well-being, not a source of emotional exhaustion. So the most important questions for us are, how can we help our clients develop a workplace culture that supports both performance and mental well-being? And we're lucky, and we know this, that at least workplaces are starting to understand that, eroding your people's mental well-being is not a good recipe for long-term performance. In fact, it's going to create turn on all kinds of issues. But again, we've got a lack of training in this area. So in our work, we do leadership training, we do group programs and so forth. The second question is, how can we help people develop the right emotional and mental skills? So we've got the workplace culture, but we've also got the internal skills that people need. And this is really a very, very poor area we've discovered. So how do we help people develop the right emotional and mental skills to cope and thrive without the need for professional support? Now, we say that without the need for professional support. Of course, we're not trying to, there'll always be a need for professional support, but a lot of people have a very, very low threshold of coping mechanisms, and they bang into professional support. And then then it turns into like, I'm sick. I'm not just going through difficulty and coping with that difficulty. And again, I'll come back to that in a moment. Okay. Yes. So Janina, I'm just going to stop and pause on your question. It seems that if people ask you politely how you're doing in a business environment, they really don't want to know. Yes. So in the common small talk conversation, the truth is that we're mostly pretending. It's exactly right. And this is part of what this talks about. This is it's really exacerbating the mental health issues in the workplace. And it tends to go from ignore, panic and fix. It's like ignore or panic and fix, but we haven't got this world where we understand how emotions work and we understand how humanity works. And so we'll come back to that in a second. So recently we ran a poll on this one simple question. Were you ever taught through your schooling or university to manage your mind and your emotional world? These answers, we had 50,000 views on this poll and we had 550 votes. And as you can see, people said 90% of people will say, no, I was never taught. But interestingly enough, in the commentary of this poll, a lot of people, I think, who said yes, talked about getting this kind of training elsewhere. So I think they were a bit confused because it's been our experience with thousands and thousands of people we've asked this question, that it's more like 99% of people will say, no, I was never taught any kind of self-awareness skills, any managing my mind skills, or any working with my emotional world kind of skills, whether that be, whatever the degree is, whatever the schooling. Fortunately, that's slowly starting to change. But for those of us adults in the workplace now, we have got a massive deficit in understanding how to manage ourselves constructively. And hence, we end up with now we've got the challenge of COVID, we've got such an epidemic of unwellness and a whole bunch of people who don't really know what to do. Yeah, that's great. So let me get to the next slide. So we've got this perfect storm at the moment. We've got people with little to no idea how to manage their emotional and mental worlds. We've got leaders who don't, have I skipped a slide? Yeah, I did skip a slide, sorry. I'm just going to come back to this slide. This is to Janina's point. So some of you would know Robert Keegan's work, an amazing expert from Harvard on adult development, adult growth, Harvard professor of psychology. And Robert Keegan, so let me just rewind, sorry. We've got our education problem. On top of the problem of education, we've got image management. And it's what Janina was talking about, where we've got this situation where most people in the workplace at some level are pretending. So I'll just read this quote from Keegan. In an ordinary organization, most people are doing a second job no one is paying them for. Most people are spending time and energy covering up their weaknesses, managing others people's impressions of them, showing themselves to their best advantage, playing politics, hiding their inadequacies, hiding their uncertainties, hiding their limitations. This is all under the broad category that we call image management. Now, we've done a lot of informal polls and surveys, if you will, with our clients on this. And based on that, we would say most people will agree it's somewhere between 30 to 50% of the average person's time and energy in large organizations is spent on these activities, politics, hiding, certainties, etc. So you get just the massive amount of drain on people. What we've also discovered as we've deepened our work in this area of image management, because one of the questions we ask our clients is, what would it be like if we could reduce image management? What would happen to your levels of productivity, your levels of resilience, your levels of mental wellness? Like everything would just be unleashed in a really positive way. But what's at the core of image management? Two things: a lack of growth mindset and values violations. The moment we are in image management, we're no longer in alignment with our values. And for those of you who know ACT, acceptance commitment therapy, which is a gold standard of therapy, at least it is in Australia for things like anxiety and depression, we know that when people are not deeply in alignment with their values, very quickly they'll start moving into anxiety and depression. So we've got this double whammy in the workplace. We've got our education doesn't help us. We don't really know how to do this management of ourselves. Plus we've got image management. So in combination, we've got this perfect storm. We've got people in the workplace with little to no idea how to manage their mental and emotional worlds. We've got leaders who don't know how to help people other than offer EAP programs or throw resources at them. So I just want to pause here and talk about something that's kind of, I need to word this politely. One of our clients recently, a new client contacted us and said, I wonder if you could help me with a real program to really help my people with their mental well-being, because gee, the care packages and the bottle of wine are just not working anymore. It's just like, I mean, that just shows sometimes the state of the lack of education and understanding. If you send a person a care package with some candy and wine, it's lovely in that it shows you care, but it doesn't provide any resources or skills. It's like, if you think about it, it's going to help the person for maybe 5 minutes, and then they're going to go straight back into the same lack of skills and pain that they're already in, and their lack of understanding. They might just keep the television on or whatever. And so I understand it's a nice gesture, but it doesn't really make a difference. I think I was thinking of a cartoon image where you could give one person a fishing rod next to the lake so they can actually learn to fish. That's the actual skills. Or you could give them a fake marshmallow fish with a bottle of wine with a fish sticker on the bottle of wine and say, this will help you, feed you with nourishing food. And so care packages, that say, they're nice, but they're not really going to change anything. And then the third problem we've got is image management is rampant in most workplaces. This extends to emotional image management and leads to social isolation, further embedding emotional exhaustion. So some of the webinars we've run with senior leaders, and we've asked them, so how are you doing? And they'll you'll get in the chat functions, you're getting some more and more honesty, but a lot of people say I'm doing great. And then we'll question that. And it turns out they're not doing so great. And then we'll question that. And they say, well, it's our role as a leader to inspire and be strong and be tough. And it's like, then the next question is, well, when you're doing that inspiring, being strong, you do realize you're being emotionally dishonest with yourself and others. That's fine, because I know you're doing your best. You think that's good. But how do you think people who are struggling feel when you're showing up like you've got everything together and you're doing well? Do you think they're genuinely inspired? What about if you were more honest and still being able to function and carry both truths? And that's surprising to people, because then you can possibly create real connection in the workplace. So all right, let me just try to catch up for a couple of the comments. Okay, some of you guys are just making comments. And just any questions? Yeah, symptoms, and of course, Morris, most organizations target the symptoms and not the root cause, because let's face it, the symptoms are a lot easier to address. They're cheaper, they're faster, they're quick fix kind of things. And like, who doesn't want that, right? I would love that too. Yes, the lack of understanding, but the intent is good. And the lack of understanding, I've personally come to a very deep place of compassion, not judgment. I mean, how do you expect people to give genuinely good resources and training, and if they themselves don't understand, they're kind of at a loss themselves? And if that's what all they know to help, well, of course, it makes sense to do that. It's not a judgment. I know I wasn't taught any emotional and mental skills at school at all. Yeah, so Tanya, how do you see authenticity and vulnerability contributes? I'm going to come back to that, because it's a very tricky subject, because just throwing out that I'm not doing well and I'm struggling can be problematic as well. It needs to be held with a degree of sort of awareness and grace, and I'll come back to that in a moment. Now, just to add to this, I've personally been extremely lucky to interview a whole bunch of leaders around the world, very senior leaders. I'd say the most junior leader of the 26 leaders I interviewed. This is very recent for my new book I'm writing with Carl Lemieux on called The Awakened Mind, and it's a sort of very deep dive into adult growth and deep mindset work and values work and growth mindset work. And we interviewed these leaders from around the world. All of them, I have a very good and very trusting relationship. So these were strikingly honest, open interviews. And after running all these interviews, every interview was an hour to an hour and a half to give you a sense of the depth of the interviews. I kind of was struck by two commonalities. Every single one of these senior leaders, and I mean, these are very successful leaders, at some level struggle with imposter syndrome. For those of you who don't know what imposter syndrome means, it's this feeling that there's a deep insecurity, and there's a feeling that I'm not enough. So I'm constantly trying to prove myself and push. And there's also this fear that I'm going to be found out, that I'm not really good enough. And so this creates image management, and it creates this push to look good, and it creates some defensiveness. There's a range of things that imposter syndrome creates. But for those of you who are listening to this call, I would suggest you probably yourself struggle with imposter syndrome, because pretty much everyone does. But that's just an interesting insight. And then the second point is, everyone I spoke to is more emotionally exhausted than they've ever been in the workplace. It was quite consistent among the group. Now, fortunately for this group, they've got coping strategies, but anecdotally, it's a really alarming stat. So we know that people are really, really struggling. The interesting thing is throwing resources at people, as in, here's something that can help you get more energy back, or here's something to fix you. Ironically, what we find is a lot of people will resist those strategies, because it's more like the organization can come across as, we're going to give you some stuff to fix you so you can get back and be productive, more productive. And what's missing often is empathy, a deep lack of empathy for people, and also an understanding that you can be extremely affected and somewhat emotionally exhausted, effective and emotionally exhausted. You can be a great leader and be sad. You can be a great leader and be overwhelmed at times. This is the human journey. Again, I'll come back to that in a second. Thanks, Rebecca. I appreciate that. I think we all do. In fact, if you understand deep mindfulness teaching, the truth is that unless you're literally enlightened, you will have some element of imposter syndrome. But yes, I think senior leaders struggle with it the most. They have performance managed, and also they're expected to know in such complexity where you don't know, right? Okay. Yeah. All right. Now I'm going to give you a real example of how we are seeing emotional mismanagement in the workplace. And then I'll ask you a few questions. This is a real example of a coaching client that I worked with about 6 months ago. We just started coaching. And the coaching session started with the client saying to me, I don't know if I should have done this session with you because I'm really feeling sad today. And that was a big admission. And I said, what do you mean you shouldn't do the coaching session if you're feeling sad? And they said, well, I'm not at my best. I'm probably not going to get the most out of the session. I said, that's really interesting. So I asked them, what would happen if you just allowed yourself to feel the sadness? Just let it be here as we are chatting in this session. And the answer was, I'll get lost in it forever. I'll let others down and I'll fail at my job. Now, I'm giving you one story, but I've heard this story from various leaders 1,000 times at least in the last 18 to 2. It's unbelievable how common this is. I've got these inconvenient feelings. I don't know what to do with them other than repress them and put them away and quote unquote, get on with it. And this reveals a deep misunderstanding of the emotional world and how to work with challenging emotions. So research on emotional suppression, which is what this is, shows that when emotions are pushed aside or ignored, they get stronger. Psychologists call this amplification. What's so interesting about this, though, is that we are, and I'll show you in another chart in a moment, our emotions are amplified while we are deadening and numbing them more, which really gets us into an interesting sort of shutdown place. Let me just keep going on this. So this is a quote from Susan David. I think is an amazing speaker. If any of you have not heard of Susan David, just Google her, listen to her TED talk, just absolutely entertaining and exceptional. But she's got this talk where she talks about dead people's goals. And I think most people have got dead people's goals. It's the goal to minimize and eliminate all bad feelings in our life. And this is what we're seeing in the workplace too. We're seeing, let me go back. We're seeing this desire for, I want the bad feelings, the emotional exhaustion to go away so that I can get on with it, be positive, keep my image management running, and succeed. This is all beautifully explained by the polyvagal chart. Now, we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to explain this quite briefly to you. But the polyvagal chart is all about the nervous system. It's more biology than psychology. And this is a wonderful example of it, or a chart from it. I've been given permission by Ruby Jo Walker, who's the designer of this, but it's based on Stephen Porges's theory. Basically, we've got these 3 states. So we've got the bottom state here is social engagement. This is when we are well, open-hearted, open-minded, we're grounded, we're in flow, like we're really, really well. Think about it if you're in a relationship with your teammates at work, there's like an ease, there's connection, there's trust, everything's good. Or even if you're at the workplace engagement, it's like you believe in your organization, you believe in senior management, You feel trust, you feel safe, you feel like things are fair, there's a sense of clarity and order in the workplace, you're engaged. The second stage happens when we go into the fight flight. So something occurs. Now it could be COVID, it could be misaligned behavior from a leader. This is something we see all the time in our work. So a leader says one thing and does another. For example, we know from our, not our research, but an additional research body, that 50% of people don't trust their boss, their direct boss. So as soon as we now don't feel safe, we don't feel engaged, we kick into fight and flight. And you'll see there's movement towards, so I'm going to fight, and then there's movement away, flight. So the movement towards is rage, anger, irritation, frustration, panic, fear, anxiety, and worry. These are intense feelings to feel. Now, if it goes on, and you'll see the little statement, I can, there's this feeling of, I've got to do something about it. I'm going to fight this. I'm going to change this. I'm going to do something. But if that goes on for long enough, you'll very quickly move into the freeze state. Yeah. Thanks, Rachel, for sharing. You'll move into the freeze state where you become helpless, raised pain threshold, depression, numbness. The interesting thing about the freeze state is it can sometimes look like the engaged state. It's kind of like, sort of seems okay, but you're so numb that you can't seem to quite get the motivation you want. Unfortunately, for a lot of people in the workplace, they're in the freeze state a lot of the time because they don't trust. For example, if you don't trust your boss, you're going to be in a freeze state. The interesting thing is that for most of us, we have this wish when we're in the freeze state, which we all get to on occasion, where we just want to get back to the engaged state and well-being. But interestingly enough, you have to re-feel the fight-flight feelings to get back to real engagement. Another way of saying it is you have to begin to deal with what's really going on in you. For the untrained mind and the unaware mind, this seems like craziness because the shutdown state feels somehow safer than the fight-flight state. And this is reason I'm showing you this diagram is because this is what we are seeing more and more in the workplace. We're seeing more and more people in the shutdown state, wishing to get to the engaged state, and more helplessness in the workplace of how do we get people back to engagement. And the interesting thing is what most people need is a space and a place to process the fight-flight feelings safely. But when you've got image management in the workplace, plus, here's a resource to fix you, you never get that safety in the workplace. So the workplace doesn't become a source of mental well-being. The workplace becomes a source of isolation, of disconnection, of fix or ignore, which is, again, I know that's not all workplaces, but it's dominant in most workplaces. So how do you, so webinar attendee, I'm going to pause here. How do you get over numbness? Because I feel I've been numb for a long time. So that's a wonderful question, because that's the question that a lot of people the problem with numbness is that when you're numb, you often don't even know you're numb. That's the problem with numbness. There's just some, it's like gray, there's a grayness, and you just don't feel motivated anymore. You don't feel engaged, but you're also not in like endless drama and pain. You just kind of shut down. The challenge is that we've got so much addictive short-term fixes in our culture, including care packages, where it's kind of like, here's a quick fix, it'll make you feel better, but they don't work, because the way out of shutdown is back into feeling. The problem with that is that if you activate feeling again, which you tend to need support, which is why you want a workplace where it's okay to share your feelings, where you activate those feelings again, it feels like it's getting worse before it gets better. Because you numbed or you shut down for a reason, and that reason is emotional pain, right? Yes, numbness can be very similar to languishing. It's like I've come to a point where I just don't know what to do anymore with this emotional exhaustion, with this pain. So I'm just going to kind of like exist for a while. But maybe I won't acknowledge these painful feelings because, and I'll come back to, if I can do this really quickly, I'll come back to this point. Most people have no idea what to do with those feelings. So in fact, we say in mindfulness practice, the untrained mind, it makes no sense to the untrained mind to feel the feelings, because it's like, what would you choose? Feeling your sadness, feeling your worry, or not feeling at all? I think 99% of people say, I'll take the not feeling at all if those are the feelings I have to feel. What most people don't understand is that when you feel those feelings for enough, they shift and you recover, and it's like you digest those feelings and you recover. It's what Susan David calls emotional flexibility. Okay, hold on a second, Jacka, okay, let me just read this question. How do we support people to move through image management and feeling unsafe in the environment? Offering support and resources might feel like it's trying to fix, exactly, but they can also be genuine attempts at support. So what do we actually do as leaders to support people to come out of that space, or create that space that feels more safe to do so, particularly when lots of those feelings don't come up from, yes, from the actual workplace. So yeah, we say on this webinar, are we going to deal with? Let's just start with the first truth. The first truth that's needed is that the leaders themselves need to be more honest with their people. You have to create the emotional safety for being honest with yourself. The second piece, that's the first piece, right? The second piece is the leaders themselves, as a general rule, need to learn how to empathize first. Now, the problem with that, Jacka, the problem with that is, and it comes back right back down to emotional management again, is that for most of us, when we empathize with others who are in pain and struggling, we get panicked because we don't know how to sit with and be with pain, emotional pain. So we get panicked, and then we get vice give, or we shut down ourselves, or we kind of like go and get help. So part of it's, you know, in webinars like this, you wish you could just go, you know, there's a little quick tip I could give you, just do this. But that's part of this webinar's point. There is no just this little quick tip. This is a part of training. The solution is to train leaders on how to emotionally manage themselves, understand that process, and then be able to empathize with others in that process without freaking out. And that part of that is, back to this point here, we need to train our leaders, we need to train our team members on the very basics of how to manage their emotional world skillfully. Because for the untrained mind, I will manage my emotions by shutting them down or acting them out. It tends into repression and addiction. So suddenly I'm watching twice as much Netflix as I used to. That's addiction. That's me kind of shutting down, moving into avoidance and addiction. That doesn't help. It's just like, it's constant cycles. We have a program in our app called Mental Health 101, which kind of, well, Mental Health Essentials, which covers the core basics, because what happens when people begin to shut down is they begin to lose contact with what's most precious to them. For the vast majority of people, they haven't even expressed to themselves what is precious to me, because they just get caught in this constant avoidance, moving away. Okay, I'm going to keep going. All right, so we've got this, let me just move, okay. So the impact to the workplace. When senior leaders deny and resist their own emotional exhaustion in order to be positive and inspiring, they role model repression and image management, unwittingly enhance the likelihood of challenging emotions being buried and hidden at the workplace to be fixed offline, which leads to a general facade, which deepens a sense of isolation. So we talked about this in the comments before, like, so the lesson number one is at the very minimum, leaders, but ideally the whole group, need to have the basic literature and understanding of speaking about feelings in a constructive way, and then accepting our humanity in a constructive way. That's kind of where it starts. Suicide ideation, don't care, yeah. Sorry, I just read that, Rebecca, and I get emotional. When I read that, I get very sad. Again, we unfortunately, and I've seen this too many times, this is as year 21 or 22 of this work for me, we see far too much narcissism in the workplace, but you know, it's just what the workplace does. The workplace rewards often shutting the difficult feelings down and getting on with it and producing, and that often leads to people being promoted who are very good at shutting their feelings down and very good at producing. And those same people, when they are in the face of people who are emotionally struggling, their solution is shut it down and get on with it, or get fixed and come back being shut down and getting on with it. And so we end up with toxic emotional cultures. So I'm just going to show, many of you have probably seen this video as a lovely reminder, right? So we've got this moment in time where we've got a lot of workplace stress, much more than normal. We've got isolation, image management, lots of difficulty. And we're asking ourselves, how do we work with this constructively? I just want to make the first point by playing this video to you around shutting down versus opening up. So I'm going to play this video for you.
There's something I want to tell you about the stress and how we have to look at stress, okay? And I think it's an important thing because many people have told me from my lectures, it's the one thing they remember, okay? I was sitting in a dentist's office and looked at an article that said, how do lobsters grow? I don't care how lobsters grow. But I was interested in it. And it points out that a lobster is a soft, mushy animal that lives inside of a rigid shell. That rigid shell does not expand. Well, how can the lobster grow? Well, as the lobster grows, that shell becomes very confining. Right? And the lobster feels itself under pressure and uncomfortable. It goes under a rock formation to protect itself from predatory fish, casts off the shell, and produces a new one. Well, eventually, that shell becomes very uncomfortable as it grows, right? Back under the rocks. And the lobster repeats this numerous times. The stimulus for the lobster to be able to grow is that it feels uncomfortable. Right? Now, if lobsters had doctors, they would never grow. Because as soon as the lobster feels uncomfortable, goes to the doctor, gets a Valium, gets a Percocet, feels fine, never comes off its shell. So I think that we have to realize that times of stress are also times that are signals for growth. And if we use adversity properly, we can grow through adversity.
Okay, so for those of you who love that video, you'll get a recording of this webinar, but you can find this video on YouTube. Just literally type in how do lobsters grow. And again, I'll come back to some of the questions. I just want to keep my flow of thinking here. Is what we're trying to say here is that there's an opportunity, if we had the skills and a bit of support, for us to all grow together into a new way of being with each other in the workplace, where the image management begins to drop away, where the acceptance of our humanity begins to increase, where there's space for difficulty. So when I work with my individual clients, what was really interesting, the one who said I shouldn't be on this call today because I'm sad. What was interesting when we sat with the sadness, we said, okay, let's just feel the sadness. Let's just be sad for a moment. I'm not panicked. Let's just be sad. Within about 15 minutes, she was smiling, and I said, what's happened? And she said, I'm just feeling much lighter and okay. I said, but you said if you felt the sadness, you'd get lost in it forever. So therefore, you're working on a completely false assumption from I didn't say this to her, but it's like your mind is telling you something that's flat out lies, that if you feel your feelings, you'll get lost in them forever. It's just not true. And then you're basing all this repression on this lack of understanding of how emotions in the mind works. This lens, many of you have talked about suicide ideation. You add that over time, that's going to lead to deep despair. Because we constantly shutting, that's our only mechanism, shut down. And then the workplace is kind of an agony because I'm trying to shut down and I'm trying to get on with it, but I don't have energy. But what is interesting is I asked the question to my client. I said, what if you could say, if we were colleagues and I said, how are you? And you said, I'm feeling sad. And I said, oh, yeah, I'm feeling anxious today. And we're like, okay, is there any way we can support each other? Just a quick two minutes. No, it's just how I am today. I'm feeling sad. Okay. Yeah, for me, it's just, I'm just in anxiety, just, COVID. And we were able to express that truth. And then we were able to go, right, let's look at the agenda and work. There's not a panic about it. There's an acceptance, a maturity, and an understanding that having difficult emotions is the human condition. It's not, nothing's wrong. A lot of the time when we're having difficult emotions, they're just interesting data, important data. And we have this relationship though where we panic in difficult feelings because again, we don't know how to manage the mind. Now, for those of you who have asked questions around suicide ideation and things, I just want to be, I think just in our legalized environment like this, I don't want to answer that question. I don't feel I'm an expert on that kind of stuff. I'm not, in the EAP, psychology, that field. Our work's more interested in how can we create workplace environments that don't generate that pain. So how can we create workplace environments that are deeply values-based, that have a natural skill. People are naturally supported and skilled in emotional and mental management, and that we have a group shared experience of that skill. We do it all together, and we learn and grow together, and we have more openness and honesty. We're more interested in creating the environment that then doesn't produce all of those side effects. Once those side effects are produced, yeah, I think that is the realm of professionals, but it's that cause and effect. The real question is, can the workplace itself become a place that doesn't generate that pain, but inversely creates, is more values-based, it has an inherent skill itself and an inherent way of relating to each other where our mental health is supported in the workplace. Okay, yes. So I'm gonna, so what we need is the ability and training. Remember, I'm saying this is a part of the puzzle. We're not pretending here that this was the whole puzzle, but we need the ability and training to name our feelings, which, I saw some in the back of the comments, someone like an emotional deck, just name our feelings. We need to access a state of awareness where we're neither fighting our feelings nor being swept away in them with victim stories or stories of revenge. But all of this depends on self-awareness and the ability to self-regulate, which is the great secret that's not mentioned. You cannot manage your feelings constructively without a stable, aware mind. It's not possible. You'll get swept away by them, and this ability to self-regulate. There's a quote that talks about emotions from Susan David again. Research now shows that the radical acceptance of all our emotions, even the messy, difficult ones, is the cornerstone to resilience, thriving, and true, authentic happiness. And again, if you know Susan David's work, she'll also talk about mindfulness. She'll also talk about you do need the stability to be able to accept your emotions. I'm getting this funny glitch when I'm, okay, my slides are skipping. So the very first step is looking in the right place. This is a slide I've used for about 20 years in our work. And what we'll often ask people is this: is it possible for two people, and these are like identical twins for argument's sake in this slide, is it possible for two people to be caught in the traffic? Those two people are in very similar circumstances. They're both going home, they're both single, they've had a day of work, they've had a similar day of work, they work in the same company, they're going home to put a microwave dinner on and watch some telly. Like, there's no rush, and they get caught in a traffic jam. Is it possible for one person to get really angry and the other to be really relaxed about the same event? And everybody eventually goes, yes, we agree. It's possible for two people to have a vastly different response to the same circumstances. And then we go, okay, so if that's true, then where is the cause of the stress for the person who's having the stress reaction, the anger? Now, if you had to say to that person, hey, what's causing you stress? They would look at you like you're an idiot. They'd say, well, of course it's the traffic, because I was okay before the traffic came along. Now there's traffic, now I'm stressed. Therefore, the cause of my difficulty is external. Therefore, the solution to my stress is changing the external world. But if you stop and look a little bit deeper, you say, but there's a person next to you in a similar circumstances who's also in the same traffic and they're not stressed. So therefore, rationally, logically, where is the cause of the stress? And the cause of the stress is in the internal mindset. It's in the thinking. It's in the lack of understanding of the mind, the lack of understanding the expectations. Stress, ongoing stress and emotional exhaustion is mostly caused by our own minds, by our own mindset. Again, not trained in it. And this is beautifully summed up by this quote from Sean Acor from Harvard. In reality, this is a huge research study, 12 years. In reality, if I knew everything about your external world, I can only predict 10% of your long-term happiness. 90% of long-term happiness is predicted by how your brain processes the world. And you could add that to how you process your emotional world. It's part of how you're processing the world. And so we come back to this piece that most of the solution and most of the problem lies within the mind. Now, some of you who know me and are on this webinar and have been asked this question before, I would invite you to please not answer this question. And I would like, if you don't mind, everyone, I'm going to take a bit of time on this one, maybe 3 or 4 minutes. Try and answer this question and put your answers in the chat function, right? So for those of you who know this and are expert, please don't answer this. But for those of you who've never had this question asked to you, see if you can answer this. If you were to practice self-awareness right now, what would you actually do? So if we had to say, guys, for the next minute, let's all be self-aware. What would you do? Okay. Got lots of answers coming. Breathe. Put a big mirror. Breathe. Yeah. Breathe. Nothing. Tune into my body. Okay. Yeah. Reflect. All right. Notice how I'm reacting. Good. Check in to see how I'm feeling. Meditate. Not bad. Feel my body. Yeah. That's unusual as a response. Okay, meditate's a tricky one because there's so many different methods of meditating, and I've met a lot of people who meditate regularly and completely unself-aware. It's because their method of meditating is all about stabilizing and calm. There's no growth work in the meditation. So you could be right, you could be wrong. So here's the interesting thing. Some of these answers are partially true. A lot of them are untrue. They're not actually accurate. But what we're just trying to highlight here, oh God, there's just too many answers, right? 99 plus. Is what, yeah, take a step, EQ, look at EQ domains. So like Amanda, for example, your answer, if you look at EQ domains, it's indicating, you know, we need an external tool to look at us, but actually it's a live practice right now. So for those of you who've talked about the body, you're very accurate. The very first, self-awareness is broken down into two words, self and awareness. So what is awareness? Awareness is stability of attention. When the attention is stable, then we are aware. We're present and stable, it's aware. To stabilize the attention over time, you need to be, the word mindfulness means to have stable attention. To be mindful is to have stable attention. What you'll notice, for example, in the emotional exhaustion field, as soon as the emotions are uncomfortable, the attention becomes very unstable. So part of mindfulness training is stabilized attention in the face of difficult feelings. Then you can do what Susan David says, you can actually feel them. You can actually accept them because the attention's stable. When we're awareing or being mindful of the self, what is the self? The self's very literal. The first one is the body. So we can know what's going on in the body. We can aware with stable attention what's happening in the body. If you do that enough, you get very skilled at it and you start learning what it means, what the body's messages are. For example, when you're not living your values, your body is screaming at you in all kinds of nausea and illness. The heart aches even. So when we begin to feel into the body, if we're not in alignment with our values, we begin to go, oh, something's not quite right here. And then we can do inquiry and curiosity work into finding what's going on. We can also be aware of a relationship to what's going on. We can also be aware of the thinking structures in the mind, the assumption structures in the mind now. Now, for many of you, as you're hearing this, you'll find this is a foreign world. And we've experienced this. This is a foreign world for most of us. Self-awareness is something you can always do right now in any circumstance. You can do it while you're in chatting to someone. You could do it while you're driving. Self-awareness doesn't require going anywhere or doing anything. It's a skill set. It's like breathing almost. You can do it now anywhere. But for most people, do not know how to do it and are not trained in it. And then we wonder why we have so much emotional mismanagement in the workplace, because people don't know how to stabilize their attention, don't know how to deal with difficult feelings constructively or even be with them and let them flow. That's the bad news. The good news is that there is help to support shifts in the physiology that lead to changes in health and vitality. And by doing that, is all about connecting to the body. We now know that embodiment and truly being in one's body and paying attention to the body cues is a huge part of healing. What we found rather challenging in our work is that this is often intellectually simplistic to people. It's a little bit like they'll almost ridicularize it. They'll be like, hold on a second. So you're saying if I just feel my body, all will be well? No, we're not saying that. We're saying that what you do when you struggle with emotion, what you do, for example, when you don't care about other people, you're completely disconnected from your body. And it's not possible to be self-aware if you're not at least aware of the most obvious part of self, the body. But the skill set's just not taught. So the entire skill set is, this entire skill set of feeling the body is developed through training in the first foundation of mindfulness. So there's 4 foundations of mindfulness. The first foundation of mindfulness is all about body awareness. It may seem simple, but it's a core life skill virtually nobody has training in, as what we've discovered. Now, I'll just pause there and I'll show you some data in a second. I'll just pause there. I just want to see if there are any questions. If you're not self-aware, do you seem to just not feel pain? Can you talk about self-comfort? Okay, hold on. Where do I start? Just keep my timing here. I'm going to give about 3 minutes to this and then finish the last questions. Connecting to my feelings, yeah. Jane, I'll give you an example of just around your example, but I'm just going to give you an additional example about anxiety. Most people, all of us have anxiety at one time or another, but what's really interesting is that most people, when they have anxiety, their anxiety doubles up. They become anxious about being anxious. And there's an idea that something's wrong if I'm anxious. That then triples up the anxiety. It's really interesting. So a lot of our anxiety is about our relationship to the anxiety. What's really interesting in mindfulness training is one of the first things we do is begin to learn to radically accept feelings. Like if I'm anxious, nothing's wrong. I'm just a human being with some anxiety. The anxiety can live with me, but I don't get anxious about being anxious. That requires quite a refined level of awareness. What I'm now talking about is the second foundation of mindfulness. So the first foundation of mindfulness, I notice the anxiety. The second foundation of mindfulness, I notice my relationship with the anxiety. That's a more advanced stage of mindfulness. It takes a more stable, aware mind. But it's this example where we begin to know what's happening in the body and then know our reacting to the body. One of the most fascinating examples in my case study interviews was one of the senior leaders said to me, I've prided myself in my entire career of being very rational and not being emotionally driven. I then started practicing mindfulness and began to discover that some of the biggest decisions and the worst decisions I make are all driven by emotions. Just because I was denying the emotions didn't mean they weren't driving me. And they were all there available to me, evident in the body in awareness, but I was just numbing them down and therefore taking irrational actions. And the primary one he was talking about is his fear of conflict. So the fear of conflict would bring up difficult emotions. He didn't know how to deal with those difficult emotions, so he avoided conflict. That led to really poor decision making. It led to lack of accountability. A whole range of problems happened in his career as a result of not being able to face the discomfort of conflict. That's again down to emotional management. Okay, what we did is we designed an 8-week program on our app where groups ran it or an external facilitator ran it, and it was an 8-week program around the first foundation of mindfulness. And we had the University of Singapore do a very rigorous peer-reviewed study on this program, this 8-week program. And the striking figure there is the one I've highlighted in red. What we found is that groups were able to reduce their emotional exhaustion by up to 58%. And it's kind of like, you might say, oh, but does this sort of body awareness help? Well, yes, the data and again, the peer-reviewed data tells us it makes a huge difference. And this is about training people the basics of how the mind catastrophizes, extrapolates, and numbs, the alternative to becoming more present in the body, and then the skills and the stability of the mind to cope with the flow and difficulty of feeling creates this. Now, if you do this in a group, which we do, you get all these other benefits as well. Engagement increases, job satisfaction, even perceived effectiveness of a leader. So we know the data tells us that this theory of becoming aware, developing mental skills, developing the ability to be more aware in the body, to be more present, develop the skills of developing emotion, has a huge impact on emotional well-being. The chat area, I'm not sure, Ian. I don't know. I think Julian will need to answer that. He has a lot of stuff. I might look at a few things. And then our programs that we've designed, because like these programs are often very expensive. And again, you know, there's budgets and things. So what we've done is we've created these programs that are available to be facilitated internally or facilitated by experts, where you can actually, we've got 3 programs that take people through a structured, science-based, evidence-based journey where we give the mindfulness program. We've got a stress and resilience program. We're a wonderful collaboration with Dr. Rick Hansen, who's the world's leading brain expert basically on resilience. and stress. And several of you may know Rick, but this is a program we developed in collaboration with Rick. And then Mental Wellbeing Essentials is our program that's based on ACT, so acceptance commitment therapy, and it's helping people recalibrate to those basics, but also developing the skill sets. Now, we know if we come back to the social isolation aspect of it, I think giving people programs like, here's some mindfulness, here's an app, are just not helpful. Because it's, again, it's like you're throwing a lazy, kind of almost a lazy solution at them. But if a group of people in the workplace together get together and go through a shared journey, this program allows them to begin speaking constructively around what's really going on for them. There's reviews where they chat, they ask questions, they share. But now they're sharing what's going on with them in the context of skills, in the context of, okay, I'm emotionally struggling, and I'm now seeing that my mind is adding to my emotional struggling because I learned that this week. And now I'm seeing that if I let that narrative go and I can actually just settle the mind, geez, it really helps. And then we get this collective skill together. Now, as our last sales pitch, if we are offering these programs to our clients, new clients, at ridiculous rates, this is a lot lower than our normal rates, but that's what we're offering with the special offer, where you can take a group of 3, up to 12. You can even do it a bigger group if you want, but we're recommending up to 12 people for $2,500. Now, if there's people on this call who are, which I know there are several who are consultants, you may want to be the facilitator of this program. We can give you all the structures, and because it's a well-researched, academically researched study, but we do actually have consultants who run these programs. If you are a consultant, you're welcome to scan that and ask us about how you can deliver these programs. And if you're not, we'd invite you to take up at least a trial, and we can even do the research on, does this program work for you? Now, for those of you who are at Novartis, you may or may not, some people don't know this at Novartis, but Novartis took a global contract on our app for all 120,000 employees. So you guys have already got access to the app. It's on the Novartis App Store. Okay, and now I'm going to take final questions. It was so challenging, yeah. Thank you. I don't know, I've got this webinar, but I have so much compassion because I personally have had some challenging times this year. I feel very grateful for the skills I have, but that doesn't mean it's easy or it's pleasant at times. It can be challenging. All right. Yeah, so Justine, I've just given you, what do you suggest are some programs or initiatives that can assist with an employee's mental well-being? That's what we've created those programs for. And we've created those programs as a group experience, but the experience can also be scaled through an organization, because you can train people internally to facilitate the programs. Because the problem with a really high quality mental health program is it's usually very expensive, because you've usually got a really serious professional. What we've done is kind of hybridize it. There's part digital learning, part group learning, part professional facilitation. And then even to the point where you have enough people who are skilled in it, you don't need the professional facilitation, and you've got a movement in your organization. And again, we're very clear about this. I think a lot of organizations make the mistake of throwing an app at an organization. That doesn't work. It has to be a shared experience with a degree of momentum and a degree of support. Yeah, Tina, I think the sharing is wonderful. You guys are amazing on the sharing. So I'm just going to wrap us up now. I'm going to hang up. We've got 2 minutes to go. I'm going to hang out for about another 10 or 15 minutes for those of you who want to continue. I'm going to do my best to answer some of the questions you have. Well, there's 52 new messages. I'm going to go, but I'm going to do my best in the next 15 minutes. Julian?
Yeah, there are a couple of interesting questions in the Q&A. If you want, it's easier. There are only 5.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thanks. That's good. If anybody's got a desperately important question, pop it in the Q&A and I'll try and answer these, right? So I'll start with, I'm copying chat box from another. Which leader for you is a great role model of showing how they genuinely feel? I can't say that I know famous leaders, and we, as a principle in our business, this is from the first book I wrote was with Jim Kurzis and Barry Posner, and they have the world's leading researchers on leadership. They have a principle to never write about famous leaders, because they think they give the message that leadership's for famous people. So we only ever write about non-famous people. But I've met countless amazing leaders that are brilliant with showing how they feel. I think, one comes to mind, I don't know who's asking this question, but one comes to mind is a leader that you may or may not know. No, I won't share it. This it's going to sound cheeky. Read my next book. My book, Awaken Mind, at the end of the interviews, some of the interviews were so moving, so authentic and vulnerable. At the end of all the interviews, I asked the leaders, would you mind if we shared your name and we shared your story in the book with your name on it, this level of vulnerability? And every single one of them said, yes, they agree. This is time to give back. So if the book will give you these amazing stories with the leaders, you can connect with them on LinkedIn. But they're not necessarily, they're very senior leaders, but they're not famous. Melita, isn't free state more to do with overly parasympathetic? Yes, I'm not an expert on sympathetic and parasympathetic. Yes, it's kind of confusing, right? So sympathetic is the stressed state. I always get confused with this. Parasympathetic is often referred to as like the rest and digest in the good system. But the free state, interestingly enough, is also parasympathetic, right? But it's parasympathetic with shutdown and disconnection. So it's one of the interesting reasons, because it's like you can survive somewhat for long periods in shutdown, but you are so fundamentally not okay in that shutdown state. Your relationships are not satisfying. In fact, your relationships are not really happening, your personal relationships, your workplace is, everything's, it's not a happy place. That's depression at some level. You're not in that fight flight, but you're in this dulled state. Okay, can follow up later. What if your manager is a known liar pre-COVID? When you cannot fix this or prove it, you cannot put in claim as you choose not to. You lose talent. HR cannot do anything without proof. Can you change a 45-year-old narcissist leader or train them? Doubt anyone will believe they have changed after training. Any suggestions? Okay. It's been my experience that it's extremely difficult. The word narcissist is a scale, by the way. You can have like narcissistic personality disorder to we're all narcissists at some level. We've all got narcissism. So it's not like a one thing, right? But the disordered part of narcissism, where the person thinks they're always right, and they have like there's not much empathy, and they're quite, but they can be very charming. Narcissists are quite challenging, and they can do a lot of damage. And part of narcissism is lying. I don't think so personally. I think that particularly if the person doesn't have a desire to change, it's not going to happen. What has to happen usually is the organizational system needs to change. So it needs to come from the top, where the system does not tolerate narcissism or the behaviors that come with narcissism. I would challenge you on HR can't do anything without proof. My challenge to you would be to write down as clearly as you can, without judgment, the actual factual behavior you're seeing. What we found over and over again is when clients tell us that person's behaving badly, I just wish I could get my hands on what they're doing, but it's just toxic. What's actually happening is you're noticing behaviors, but then your judging is kicking in and all of your reaction to what's happening. And then you lose connection with the facts of what's happening, and you end up with the reality of your judgment and all your reaction. So it's what do we often invite our clients to do is like literally jot down the idiot-proof simple what actually happened, right? So for example, I personally had an experience with a narcissist client, one of the people with a client. And what I realized, like when I got down to it's quite boring, what I noticed is the person would make promises in a meeting. They would say, yeah, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And then there was never any follow-up, ever. And then when people challenged that person on the not doing anything, other people in the organization, the response would be, yeah, no, it's in the agenda, it's happening, it's complex, you don't understand. So it was very specific, but the facts are the facts. What was interesting for me is that the organization still didn't address that, because some people are just really good at that. My personal advice is that if you're with a leader who you think's a narcissist and is never going to change, my personal advice is live your values, decide your values, live, because that's how you get back your mental health. You reconnect with your values, live them to the point that either they get kicked out or you get it kicked out, or alternatively leave. Because narcissists have an amazingly damaging impact on our sense of self-esteem, self-worth over time. And wishing they would change is a fool's errand. You change, but what are you going to change about yourself? Because part of you is probably accepting it, probably indulging it at some level. Don't accept it, call it out, go with the discomfort. Do what you need to do so that you are aligned with your values. That's the real question. So where would humans find a safe place to shed their uncomfortable mindfulness truths? Ursa, I think that's in a myriad of places. It can be a very empathetic listener. It's like we can't stress highly enough how important empathy is. I mean, many of you have commented, it was a beautiful comment, like, I don't feel so alone just listening to the commentary there, right? It's like, oh God, we're all in this together at some level. Then the system, relaxes. It could be a good friend, it could be a therapist. I know for me personally, when I get to a place where the emotions, sometimes life events have happened for me, where the emotions are just too big, and I can't seem to feel, even with all my skills, I can't seem to feel safe enough to feel them by myself. In those moments, I'll reach out to someone I know who I can trust, that will just allow me to express my feelings and be with my feelings without them trying to fix me. So it could be a friend. It could be a great therapist. A mindfulness retreat is not necessarily the best place to do that, because a mindfulness retreat can often be quite demanding. And again, I'll have to spend an hour explaining to you why. But I would more likely go to a place where you can speak, like a therapy retreat, somewhere where you can speak, where you can talk about what's going on if you're really in a lot of emotional pain. Mindfulness retreats are good if you've got a bit of experience on board and you know how to, in that stability of mind, work with your emotions, but you need to know a little bit before. All right, what about when people think your authenticity is fake and hate you for it? Or they pretend and use this as a tool to compete and climb the ladder? How do we get rid of the bloody ladder? Unfortunately, when I last looked, I did not become a miracle worker or a saint or something, or had power that could change anything. There's an interesting stage in adult development where there's a moment in time. Now, it takes quite a lot to get there. There's a moment in time where you choose your values over people's response to them, where you don't care if they hate you for it or not, because you begin to recognize that living your values is a far healthier choice for you than needing people to like you for living your values. And that's a big, big shift. And that's a huge shift in mental well-being as well. It's where I live my values and I don't mind if you don't like it. Now, you need to have a higher level of self-awareness to do that well, because it's very easy the mind is extremely tricky in deluding us, in making us believe we're doing something that we're actually not. You know, when you say to someone, you criticize them and then you say, oh, I'm just stating the facts. In that moment, your mind is convincing you you're not angry and you're not trying to hurt that person, when in fact you are angry and you're trying to make that person feel ashamed. The mind's brilliant at lying to us and deceiving us about our own intentions. So if someone's saying your authenticity is fake and I don't believe that, for me, if someone said that, there would be an alarm bell for, I wonder if I am being fake. I would inquire. I'd get interested if someone said that to me. But at the end, if I came to, and it requires a lot of honesty, if I came to the answer of no, that is genuine for me, that's my truth, then I would relax and I go, okay, well, that person's obviously got some issues that they need to work for. Maybe my honesty is really grating on their lack of honesty. Okay. And that's their business. That's not my business. And then the latter becomes less relevant. Do you have any recommendations for breath work? Breath work, Anne Harrison. I think Google Anne Harrison for breath work. But that's sort of the trauma breath work, right? That's not breathing, constructive mindfulness breathing. It's different. That's like if you've got trauma. Yes, you'll be sent a copy of the webinar, Jake. Can be a copy? Yes, you'll get a copy. Thanks for everything spoken. It really resonates with an internal consultant, and would love to discuss how programs. Yes, Donna, great. Please, I think Julian will respond to you. Hopefully you just got that QR code. If you didn't, it's on there. Hold on, the Q&A is in front of it now. Scale that QR code and we'll chat to you. Does this program skill up attendees to be able to deliver their learning? Yes, it does. You can internally deliver the training to your people, yourself. It's very useful to have an expert, and that's what how we have deliver the first one or two programs, and even have that expert as a resource for the organization. Again, it's really down to budgets. I mean, first prize is the expert does it. Second prize is you have a really great group of trained people doing it. Actually, that can even be better than first prize, to be honest. And then third, I shouldn't say it like that. Even a leader who's got a genuine practice, who's sincerely trying to work on it, who runs it with their team, because we give them the resources to do it, arguably could be better than the external expert, because it's about us all going on a vulnerable journey together, exploring ourselves and our mind together. And the program's got all this. That's how just interestingly enough, all that research that I showed you from the University of Singapore, that was self-led. That wasn't even led by us. This was people who didn't even understand mindfulness, taking a facilitator guide with their group and running it. And you still get these extraordinary results. Yes, Karen, you can. No problem. Been arc for ages, had a break. Yeah. So whoever's, it says anonymous, Jenny, but I have had a long personal relationship with a narcissist, which I've now finished. Oh my God. Yeah. The hardest thing to accept when you're working with a narcissist is that you cannot change them. It's madness. The question for you when you're around a narcissist is, why am I not valuing myself? Because if you're in a relationship with a narcissist and you stay in that, whether that be with a boss, a team member, or a marriage, or a friendship, it's like a narcissist will tend to have relationships with people they can get away with a narcissism. Those people tend to not value themselves enough. So it's a really interesting, that was what sparked it for me. It was like, wow, I obviously had something in me that felt like I needed to be with someone who was always right. Huh, okay, that's interesting. What's it in me? And that set me into a very big growth journey. Habitual changes are really hard. I'm conscious to be kind to self. Yeah, they're very, very hard. The research tells us you only can change one habit at a time. Most people get ambitious. I'll take on 5 changes. It always fails. Always do one change at a time. And just take up a basic mindfulness practice. It's simple, like 5 minutes. It's much about momentum. It's like when we take on a practice, any practice that requires a bit of discipline, but it's good for us, we're giving ourselves a really important psychological message. And that message is, I am worthy of being looked after by myself. And so even small movements are very symbolically important for us. It's just something as simple as, I'm going to go for a 10-minute walk twice a week when I didn't before. And it's just that affirmation that some part of you still cares about you. You still matter, is what's so important about those symbols. And don't underestimate the small moves. And then when you walk, if you're going to go for a walk, for example, it's really useful to know the mind and how the mind will erode your well-being in those 10 minutes or support your well-being. And that's where the mindfulness and the understanding of the mind can be extremely helpful. Sometimes habitual changes, yeah, I got that one. Amazing. I'm at that stage. Finally, well done. Thank you. I think that's it. Julian, any other things I should be looking at?
I don't think so, no. All good.
Yeah. So Julian, can we share, does the chat function get shared? Like, do you just copy and paste it or something?
So I can, I believe there is an option to save chat. And then it's a TXT file. I'm not sure what we're going to do with that, to be honest, but happy to share it.
Yeah, I think we need to reread it. Just be sure that no one's exposed, because I think there was some really personal sharing. So for those of you who
decide not to share it, I think it's probably the most sensible. So
probably the most sensible, unfortunately, not to share it. Otherwise, we'll sit there censoring and we'll get into trouble like Facebook does sometimes when they censor people, I think. Okay, yeah. We have this saying, I'll just wrap it up with the last saying. For those of you still on, thank you. I see it's still 237 people on the talk right now. Is I'll just share a last personal thing for me was I grew up with a very driven mindset and that classic push, get things done, succeed mindset. And I never thought there was a place for kindness because kindness was weakness at some level in my mind. And one day I was just asked a simple question, like when you are psychologically well, are you nicer to be around or harder to be around for those around you? I was like, yeah, when I'm psychologically well, I'm a lot nicer to be around. And then I said, so therefore wishing yourself to be well, to really be well, and that act of kindness towards yourself and taking proactive steps to looking after your psychological emotional state is not just, when it's an act from kindness, it's not self-centered at all, is it? It's an act for you, but it is an act that supports everyone around you because you are far more supportive and healthier to be around when you are well. And so it comes down to this quote from famous Zen teacher Thich Nhat Hanh: when we are well, our wellness spills onto others. And when we are unwell, our unwellness spills onto others. So please be well. And such a lovely remembering. I know for myself, whenever I meditate, at the end of the meditation, I always wish myself well. May I be well today. Like I really wish myself well. And for those of you still listening, I wish you well. And I wish you to find a kindness and even what, if you haven't done it already, one simple step that is evidence that you do wish yourself well. Take that one positive step. May you be well. Thank you. And with that, I think we'll sign off. I'm going to thank you everyone for attending. Deeply appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. I'm just letting that, as people sign off, I'm just reading the chat function. Thank you, Erin. It's just lovely, isn't it? Thank you very much for those of you who've signed off. It's beautiful. Appreciate it. One of the things I'm delighted about, Julian, is that this webinar has been at some level a forum for others to share with each other. That's been really great. Just to share that. I know there's some really deep sharing right in the.
Yeah, that's true. People really, it seems like people felt comfortable here, which is always a nice thing to see.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, some of the sharings are really moving.
Yeah, a few things were crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't keep up with the chat function, just so much.
Yeah, there were lots of people in, and everyone was pretty engaged.
Yeah. Health and rehab, yeah. Sucks a lot of me. And this comment by Tina here is powerful. Keep positive. It sucks the life out of me, making the next day harder. So mentally, I keep putting, yeah, the happy, brave face. Yeah. Yeah. That's, this is what the webinar is about. Like that comment, it's like just allow yourself to be sad. Rock up at work sad. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with rocking up at work sad and being sad. It's still functioning. That's the message. I found when I've done it, and my response from my clients is always wonderful. It's never been negative. Yeah. Kazi, I think there will be a recording of the webinar, so you can certainly pause things and take notes on whatever you want. Diane, I don't think we'll be sharing the slides. We will be sharing a recording of the video, though, a recording of the webinar. So. Yeah, thanks. All right, so thanks for those of you hanging out, still hanging out on the webinar. I hope you're well. And I'm gonna now stop the share, and I'm going to end the webinar. I don't know if I should, Julian, should I try and save this?
No, good. Let's just leave.
Leave it. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.